Testing, testing, one,
That's what I saw. This thing wasn't moving at the bottom, but I was like, oh, there's no audio on it now.
All right, so now you can hear us. Just want to let you know we've had prayer. While our heads bowed, obviously. And the important thing is we were praying for lots of other folks that are out there. We mentioned a whole list of people. And just be assured that you're included. Okay, you're included in that. And we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll
make sure everybody says the audio is good.
Yeah, it should be fine now.
Should be okay. Titus says none yet.
It's also on a delay.
Is that a delay?
Yeah, there's several seconds.
Of course, he might have to restart. If he may have to
Now he's
reload.
got it, okay.
Okay, we're good.
Right, we're ready.
And just tell them wait for the part where Simeon's like punching the camera.
Yeah. All right, so sorry for that. Fortunately, we caught it early. And
We depend on everybody to let us know.
yeah, God knows all that was said and so forth. So that's the
You can
important
watch the
thing.
video and catch what you missed.
That's the important thing.
Okay,
So-
we're in chapter 6 on the story now. It was a dark, rainy night, and the raindrops beating against the old single-pane windows made sleep difficult for Hank and Mary. She dropped off eventually, but Hank, already troubled in spirit, found it much harder to relax. It had been a lousy day anyway. He had worked on painting that slogan off the front of the house and tried to figure out who in the world would write such a thing against him. His ears were still ringing with the conversation he'd had with Alf Brummel, and his mind still played over and over the bitter comments from the board meeting. Now he could add to his apprehensions the congregational meeting on Friday, and he prayed to the Lord in desperate, hushed whispers as he lay there in the dark. Funny how every lump in a mattress seems so much more lumpy when you're upset. Hank began to worry that he would keep Mary awake with his tossing and turning. He lay on his back, he lay on his side, his other side, put his arms under his pillow, over his pillow. He grabbed a Kleenex and blew his nose and looked over at the clock. 12:20. They had turned in at 10. But sleep finally does come, and usually in such an unannounced way you don't even know you're out until you wake up. And sometime that night Hank dozed off. But after a few hours his dreams began to go sour. They were the usual silly things at first, like driving a car through his living room and then flying in the car that turned into an airplane. But then the images began to rush and riot through his head, growing frantic and chaotic. He started running from dangers. He could hear screams. There was a sensation of falling and the sight and taste of blood, and images went from bright and colorful to monochromatic and dismal. He was constantly fighting, struggling for his life. Dangers and enemies surrounded him, closing in. None of it made any sense, but one thing was definite throughout: stark terror. He wanted to scream, but he didn't have time between fighting off enemies, monsters, and unseen forces. His pulse began to pound in his ears. The whole world seemed to be reeling and throbbing. The horrible conflict rushing in his head began to push its way to the surface of the conscious everyday Hank. He stirred in bed, rolled over on his back, and drew a deep, waking up breath. His eyes half opened, not focused on anything. He was in that strange state of halfway between sleep and consciousness. Did he really see it? There was an eerie projection in midair, like a glowing painting on black velvet, right above the bed, so close he could almost smell sulfur. A hideous mask of a face hovered, contorting in grotesque movements, as it spit out vicious words he couldn't understand. His eyes sprung open like a trap. He thought he could still see the face just fading away, but instantly felt like he'd been struck by a very heavy blow to his chest. His heart began to race and pound like it would burst through his ribs. He could feel his pajamas and the bedsheets sticking to him, drenched in sweat. He lay there panting for breath, waiting for his heart to calm down. But nothing changed, and he couldn't make it change. "You're just having a nightmare," he kept telling himself, but he couldn't seem to wake up. He purposely opened his eyes wide and looked around the darkened room, even though part of him wanted to regress back to childhood and just hide under the covers until the ghosts and monsters went away. He saw nothing in the room out of the ordinary. The goblin in the corner was nothing but his shirt hanging on a chair, and a strange halo of light on the wall was just the street light reflecting off the crystal of his watch. But he had been severely frightened, and he still felt scared. He could feel himself shaking as he desperately tried to sort hallucination from reality. He watched and listened. Even the silence felt sinister. He found no comfort, only the dread that something evil hid behind it, an intruder or a demon waiting and watching for the right moment. What was that? A creak in the house? Footsteps? No, he told himself, just the wind against the windows. The rain had stopped. And another noise, this time a rustling in the living room. He had never heard that noise at night before. I gotta wake up, I gotta wake up. Come on, Hart, quiet down so I can hear. He forced himself to sit up in bed, even though it made him feel more vulnerable, and he remained there for several minutes, trying to stifle his heart's pounding with his hand over his chest. The pounding finally settled back, but the rate remained rapid. He could feel the sweat turning cold against his skin. Should he get up or go back to sleep? Sleep was definitely out. He decided to get up and look around and walk it off. There was a clatter this time. In the kitchen, now Hank started praying. Meanwhile, Marshall had had the same kind of dreams and felt the same heart-pounding fear. Voices. It sure sounded like voices somewhere. Was it Sandy? Maybe a radio? But who knows, he thought to himself. This town is going crazy anyway, and now the sickies are in my house. He slid out of bed, quietly put on his slippers, and moved over to the closet to grab a baseball bat. Just like back home, he thought. Now somebody's going to have mush for brains. He looked out his bedroom door and up and down the hallway. No lights were on anywhere. No flashlight beams played about. But his guts were doing a square dance under his ribs, and there had to be some reason for it. He reached for the hallway light and flipped a switch. Nuts. The bulb was burnt out. Since when, he didn't know, but he stood in the dark and felt his courage deflating just that much more. He gripped the bat more tightly and moved down the hall, staying close to the wall and looking ahead, looking behind him, listening. He thought he could hear a quiet rustling somewhere. Something was moving. At the archway that led into the living room, his eyes caught something, and he pressed himself against the wall for concealment. The front door was open. Now his heart really was pounding. In a strange jungle way, he felt better. At least there was an indication of a real enemy. It was this lousy fear with no reason that was spooking him. He'd already been through that sort of thing once today. And with that thought, a strange idea came to him. That professor lady must be in the house. He moved down the hall to check Sandy's room and make sure she was all right. He wanted to stay between Kate and Sandy and whatever was out there in the rest of the house. Sandy's bedroom door was open, and that was unusual. It made him all the more cautious. He inched along the wall toward the doorway, and then, bat ready in his hands, peered into the room. Something was up. Sandy was, at least. Her bed was empty, and she was gone. He flicked on her bedroom light. The bed had been slept in, but now the covers were thrown back hastily, and the room was in disarray. As he moved cautiously down the darkened hall, it occurred to him that Sandy might just be up getting a drink, using the bathroom, or reading. But such simple logic weakened against the horrible feeling that something was dreadfully wrong. He took deep breaths, trying with great effort to hold himself steady, but all the time felt an insidious earthly terror, as if he were inches from the crushing teeth of some monster he couldn't see. The bathroom was cold and dark. He turned on the light, dreading what he might see, but nothing out of the ordinary. He left that light on and headed back toward the living room. He peered like some kind of stalking fugitive through the archway. There was that rustling sound again. He flipped on the lights. Ah, the cold night air was coming in through the front door, rustling the drapes. No, Sandy was nowhere to be seen, not in the living room or anywhere in the kitchen. Maybe she was right outside. But he had undeniable qualms about crossing the living room to the front door, walking past all the furniture that could hide an assailant. He gripped the bat tightly, keeping it up and ready. He kept his back to the wall, making his way around the perimeter of the room, stepping around the sofa after checking behind it, maneuvering around the stereo, and finally reaching the door. He went out onto the porch into the cool night air, and for some reason felt suddenly safer. The town was still quiet this time of night. Everyone else was certainly asleep right now, not sneaking around their houses with baseball bats. So he took a moment to regather himself and then went back inside. Locking the door behind him was just like shutting himself in a dark closet with a couple hundred vipers. The fear returned, and he gripped his bat tightly. With his back against the door, he looked around the room again. Why was it so dark? The lights were on, but every bulb seemed so dim, as if there was some kind of brownout. Hogan, he thought to himself, either you've really lost a screw or you're in big, big trouble. He remained frozen there by the door, looking and listening. There had to be somebody or something in the house. He couldn't hear them or see them, but he could certainly feel them. Outside the house, lying low in the evergreens and hedges, Tall and his company watched as demons, at least 40 according to Tall's count, played havoc with Marshall's mind and spirit. They swooped like deadly black swallows in and out of the house, through the rooms, around and around Marshall, screaming taunts and blasphemies and playing with ever-increasing his fears. Tall kept careful watch for the dreaded Rafar, but the veil wasn't among this wild group. But there could be no doubt, however, that Rafar had sent them. Tall and the others agonized, feeling Marshall's pain. One demon, an ugly little imp with bristling needle-sharp quills all over his body, leaped on Marshall's shoulders and beat upon his head, screaming, "You're gonna die, Hogan, you're gonna die. Your daughter's dead and you're gonna die." Guido could hardly control himself. His big sword slipped with a metallic ring from its sheath, but Tall's strong arm held him back. "Please, Captain," Guido pleaded. "Never before have I only watched this happen." "Bridle yourself, dear warrior," Tall cautioned. "I will strike them only once." Guido could see that even Tall was severely pained by his own order. Forbear, forbear, he must go through it. That's the end of that section. Next one will probably take another 15 minutes. So.
Yeah.
2 men under trial.
So why are we sharing this particular story? What's the purpose?
To be an encouragement?
Well, ultimately that, of course, I think
Do you mean
just an
specifically
awareness.
this story or the story in general?
The story in general. Why
And
Why are
don't
we-
play around with the spirit.
Yeah, to notify people, to make them more aware of the reality of the spiritual realm that is constantly. I mean, does it ever sleep? Does it ever take a vacation? No. You know, it's always at work, trying to.
There's a tendency
Connive.
in the Western world of Christians to think that the involvement of demons is just myth, or that if there's anybody who has demonic issues, they're in other countries, they can't get visas to come into the United States. You know, because the churches don't want to acknowledge that this kind of thing exists.
Oh, man. Have you ever seen a story on that sign, Charlie?
Mm-mm.
The one in California that's where part of it is, and I think it's in
Oh,
Nevada.
Scientology, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and in Nevada there where they've put the whole thing underground.
It's a really insidious deception, and there's a whole lot of weird religious beliefs and mishmashes,
Scientology is like the money of religion, isn't it?
for the most part, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got all those.
A lot of celebrities.
Yeah, but
Right.
Scientology is the only one that you have to have like money for, specifically for understanding nothing.
To get into the
Anyway, it's
Yeah.
it's to create an awareness of, you know, really the battle that's going on around us. And so we want to just keep reminding folks that that's why we're going through this particular story here. And we want to go ahead and continue in our study of Revelation. We're all the way up to chapter 21, which is would have to be a real encouragement for everybody, every Christian, because we're talking about the holy city itself and the fact that all things are being made new. John said there in chapter 21, "I saw a new heaven and a new earth. The first heaven and the first earth had passed away." So God is going to recreate or remake. He'll probably leave the core of the planet and certain elements intact, and then just burn sin out of his creation and make it all new. Now the important thing is where a person might be when that takes place. That's the important consideration. Because just like back at the time of the flood, if you're on the boat, you're inside the ark, you're secure. If you're outside the ark, what happens? You're going to be destroyed, right? Same scenario at the end. The ark at the end, though, is the holy city. Okay, and we'll pick it up in verse 9. I think is kind of where we left off last week. And one of the 7 angels who had the 7 last plagues came to John and said, "Come, I'll show you the bride, the Lamb's wife." And we talked a little bit about that as a means of introduction for this week. The city is likened as a bride because just like a bride would prepare for a wedding, extensive preparation for a wedding, Christ went to prepare a place for us and to prepare the city before it was going to come. And so it's considered or likened to a bride. It means that it just didn't, God just didn't blink it into existence. There was some preparation, some forethought, all kinds of things in the city. And so the angel carries him away, or not the angel, but the one of the 7 angels that carries him away in the spirit to a great and high mountain. Why would he have to take him to a great and high mountain to show him the city?
Because the city's also great and high.
Well, you see all of it?
Yeah, he wants him. I mean, if you're way up on a high mountain, the things down below you become somewhat insignificant. If you've ever been in an airplane, you're flying across areas that are habited. When you look down, what do you see? You can't see any real detail. It just looks like, if you're over top of a city, it almost looks like a circuit board with different little circuits and stuff. You can't really make out any of the great detail and any real significance. So he takes him away from all of the distraction of this world up to a high place, so he has a great view of this diamond, if you will, that's coming down out of the sky. Right? The great city, the holy Jerusalem, is descending out of heaven from God. Verse 11 says, having the glory of God, her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Mom was laughing.
We had an interesting discussion this morning on that
That's gonna
phrase,
be
clear
quite
as
a
crystal,
city anyway.
because Strong's Concordance is as clear as mud on this particular phrase.
Clear as mud?
Yeah.
Why?
Let me find it for you. I've got it here.
Clear as mud.
Intransitively. It's an intransitively.
Well, the word is crystallizo, which is crystal.
Right.
And it's only been used that one place.
Yeah, this is the only place in the Bible that word is used.
Crystal clear?
Which mean, yeah, you would think crystal clear, right? But there's kind of an anomaly with it. But
So when they say clear as mud, could that mean like?
I said clear as mud.
Oh.
Because when you looked at this and you have this word intransitively. Have you ever used that word intransitively? I read a lot. I've never seen the word.
Only in transit.
Only when you're moving, right? Something to do, I think, with the formation of how ice develops. You know, ice becomes kind of translucent. And of course, the colder you get, also it takes on a characteristic of magnetism to get down to absolute zero. But at any rate.
But the word crystallizo is where we get our word crystal from. So basically it's saying it's like a crystal.
Right.
And anybody that understands gemstones would recognize that that probably means something, not necessarily crystal clear. Not everything is clear, crystals,
Translucent.
some of them are translucent, some of them are clear, like these are translucent, yet these are very clear.
Mhm.
Now it says, but like jasper,
And jasper could be a variety of colors,
right,
or a hint of color. And a lot of Bible scholars actually believe that jasper, the word jasper was used, but the intent was that it was like a diamond.
be interesting to have diamond walls.
Anyway, we can only relate to, remember, God says that for the redeemed, eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, it's not even entered into your mind, the things that God has in mind for us, for the redeemed. There's more to this holy city than what we can understand with our understanding of, what gemstones are and what they look like and how they act when light goes through them and this kind of thing. And you pick that up when you look at the first couple of words there. This great city, this holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. See, that's really the whole thing that we're talking about there. This city possesses the glory of God. Right? Now, when you go through Scripture, you'll find well over 100, probably 150 references to that type of language. The glory of God. What does that signify? What does that indicate? Is it just indicating a radiant being? If someone, Titus calls, in fact, a lot of the scriptures that use this terminology are related to the second coming of Christ. And of course, Titus in chapter 2, he kind of says it best. He says it's a glorious coming, right? And so what we get from that, or what we assume from that, is it's going to be bright, right? It's going to be radiant. It's going to be spectacular. I mean, we can fill in lots of different words when we talk about having the glory of God. But you also might remember that back in Exodus, when Moses was called up into Mount Sinai, on the mountain there, and he was going to meet with God. And remember, the scripture says that God passed before him. It says the glory of God passed before him.
He only got a glimpse
Of
of
his
back.
backside, right? And then, as you read further in that chapter, it starts naming lots of characteristics of God. So, if you really study out what the glory of God really means, it really is tied to his character. There isn't any ambiguity. There isn't any distortion with God. He's perfect, more perfect than what we think perfect is. When we say perfect, things come up into our minds, but he's more perfect than that, than we can even imagine. Right? So his glory is very, very directly tied to his very character. Just like the transcript of the law that he wrote with his own hand, the law that was penned on tables of stone is really a transcript of his character. Okay? And again, we can't possibly fully understand it. The Bible tells us very clearly that who can figure out God? Nobody can figure him out. Nobody can put him in a test tube and analyze him and break him down, and look at all the components and say, oh yeah, he's this and this and this and that. Nobody can figure out God, all right? There's going to be no figuring out. It's going to be wonderful throughout eternity, getting to learn more and more, and notice more and experience more and more about him. But this city is a reflection of the character of God. And that puts it in a category that is way, way outside of what we can comprehend. Right? John is just seeing this dazzling thing, and he has to be overwhelmed by it, I'm sure.
Well, it's not supposed to be able to look at it.
But the city has the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone, right? Now, the word light is just the word, poster, and that's only used in the Bible twice. It's used right here in this particular verse right here, and it's also used in Philippians 2, verse 15. And I wanted somebody to look that up. Philippians 2:15. So you've got the glory, and of course glory is connected to, but different than the light. So you have to understand, when we think of glory, we think of something bright, brilliant, we think of luminous, something dazzling, but it's separate, because he's mentioning the light specifically here in the next sentence. The light was like a most precious stone.
Susan says, we see the beauty of his heart in the words of the Bible, and especially the Ten Commandments. But I'd love to see his write. I'd love to see how he writes, and I'd love to see his penmanship.
Yeah, what's interesting about that, Susan, is that Ron Wyatt was able to look at the tables of stone that were in the ark when he was down in the chamber below Golgotha. The angel actually handed those tablets to him, so he was able to hold them momentarily, and he was able to see some of the writing himself. And it had to be quite the experience, I'll tell you, to actually see that with your own mortal eyes, the writing there. And of course, this is the second set. The tablets were hewn by who?
The first time or the second time?
Second time. I mean, the ones that he's looking at there, the ones that Ron were looking at were hewn by Moses, but God still did the writing. The first set, remember, he threw down.
Yeah, he threw down and broke them.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it had to be quite something. Again, that writing, anything that God writes or anything that God speaks is going to last for eternity. So we'll get to see that writing ourselves, for sure. But who's got Philippians 2:15? Go ahead and read it.
That ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world.
Okay, so that word there is the same word that's found here, and it's the only other place that it's used in Scripture. So it's specific. So it's talking about, I think specifically, God's people at the end of time who shine like lights. It's the same light that is emanating from the holy city here. Okay, so if the light from the holy city is a reflection of whose character?
Christ.
God's character. Then those that text that Elijah just said talked about those living in a perverse and distorted world. They end up reflecting the character of Christ. I mean, that's a specific text that talks about the character of Christ being replicated in those living, particularly at the end of time. Okay. 1 John 3:2 also says the same thing. That's the way we can see him as he is, because we're reflecting that character. Okay. So it's just interesting when you find some of these words that are only used once or twice in the Bible, what they're kind of directly tied to. Okay, so her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. And of course, Simi said, clear as mud. That phrase, clear as mud, comes from M-U-D-D, the name Mud, right? It was the guy that was involved with the Lincoln assassination, I believe. And clear as mud means that it's totally distorted and so forth. And
It's a sarcastic
it's a sarcastic expression, yeah. That's kind of where it came
Susan
from.
says, let your light so shine before men that they see your good works and glorify God.
Yeah, Matthew. That was the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah. Yeah, and of course what the Bible really is trying to say is, I want control of your mind. Let this mind be in you which was in Christ Jesus, Philippians 2:5. So that the character of Christ is emanated, is reflected into a world of darkness. That's what God is really calling his people to. That was the mission of the Jews. That's the mission of any Christian. That's the mission of particularly those at the end. And that becomes a vindication of God's character. You see. Of God's character. All right, so this light, this city, shines like jasper stone. And a lot of people think that was really like a diamond. This particular word, jasper, iaspes, is used 4 times in the Bible. And in every case, it's found in the book of Revelation. Every reference to this word is in the book of Revelation here. And when you look at those references, one identifies God himself as being like a jasper stone. The other is the glory or radiance of the city as a jasper stone. His glory, God's glory or radiance as a jasper. The next one is the building itself. And then the next one is the foundation, the foundations of the city. So it's kind of interesting. You get this kind of stepping stone where this word is used 4 times. It's God, his glory, the holy city, and then the foundations. So it's a stepping stone, all-encompassing, kind of interesting. Okay, verse 12 says, also, she, meaning that bride, that holy city, had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates, and the names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. That's getting pretty specific, isn't it, in terms of describing the city here. I don't know if maybe if the city was turning as it came down so that John could see all 4 sides, eventually. Or if he was just told that, this side is a mirror image of the other side and the other side, etc., etc. But it had a great and high wall. And this word as well indicates a wall that surrounds the city. That's our reference. Now, I don't think we can be totally dogmatic about that, because in the new earth, why would you put a wall around a city? Why did the city of Jerusalem, the old Jerusalem, why did it have a wall around it?
The original Jerusalem?
Yeah, the one that's
protected from invaders.
Yeah, even the one that's over there now. You can go over to Israel and visit Jerusalem. It has a wall around it, and it's got different gates in the wall. Right? Scholars are not certain whether the New Jerusalem has a wall like a wall that surrounds the city, or if the city itself has the wall. The building itself is the wall that it's talking about, and the gates are actually in the city itself. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that instead of the gates being in the wall surrounding it,
Kind of like a dome?
they're actually in the building itself. Like a stadium or something, where you actually go right into it.
Yeah.
So we're not certain, and the language isn't totally clear. It just says here that.
But we do know that it is clear.
Yeah, the word jasper doesn't have any clear definition. The word that's translated as jasper.
Right.
They just don't know what type of stone it was. It could the walls could even be opal, which is kind of a moonstone. It's translucent but clear.
Right. And it could be various colors, and it could even be a diamond. So, which a lot of people think that's the case.
At least we know the walls are clear.
You've got 12 gates. You got 12 angels. So that means you've got at least one angel at each gate, right? And then you've got the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. And then 13, it gets this more specific. 3 gates on the east side, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, 3 on the west.
So thinking of that one question though, why we would have a wall, why would we also have angels that watch those gates?
Right, the reason why you would have a wall would be for protection.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to keep certain people out, to keep certain people in. I mean, you're creating a boundary there, is what you're doing with a wall. And my question was, in the New Jerusalem,
Why do we need walls?
why would there ever be a wall to keep anybody out or to keep anybody in?
Well, the Bible, I mean, it says later on as we read that the gates don't close.
Right, which is something else that,
Never worry about protection, you're always
Yeah.
safe and secure.
yeah.
The wall could be just for the sheer beauty of it. I mean, if the New Jerusalem is a pyramid shape, you know, you need, in order to have that capstone at the top, you have to have the walls, you know.
So you think it could just be like entirely encased?
If you didn't have the wall, you wouldn't need the gates.
True?
That's what I was thinking, kind of like a dome, like a pyramid.
Okay, so maybe, Kenny's point is interesting, maybe the whole reason for the wall is for the gates, so that you can put the names, and maybe the whole reason for the gates is so you can have the names.
Well, I think there has to be,
Of the-
a defined boundaries of this, because if this is a city coming down out of heaven, you couldn't just have this flat city in like a section coming out of the sky. That would look kind of weird.
Well, you're going to end up having all Satan and all his followers around that city. That's the reason the wall's there, probably.
It's also possible that all of these precious stones have something to do with generating an energy that's necessary for maximum health and healing and vitality.
Well, in the middle is going to be the tree of life. I
Right.
believe that's where the healing and everything going to take place each time you visit.
Mm-hmm.
I think it once a month it bears its fruit,
Yeah.
12 different kinds.
And you gotta wonder, is it 12 types of fruit every month or a different type of fruit every month for 12 months?
Now, I think there are 12 different ones on the tree at the same time.
All right, well, let's continue. So, why the 12 tribes of Israel on the
That-
gates?
There's a jasper stone for each
So
tribe.
when you go through the gate, what is that signifying? Because are you going to have a particular gate that you have to go through when you go in the city, or can you just kind of randomly go in and out of any gate that you want?
Well, you got 12 gates. Each
I think-
tribe has its own
Yeah.
gate to go in.
But I think too that when you talk about names on a wall, that's a commemoration thing. That's like
Memorial.
like we name buildings, the so-and-so building,
This is
in
the
honor of
Memorial
them.
Hall, that's the so-and-so hall.
Yeah, it's more of an honorary thing than a designation that this is the only one you can use. It's more like, okay, these were the 12 tribes of Israel that became overcomers. And so you've got a commemoration there, and then you've got the 12 disciples' names at another place. And so it's really more of I think it's God's way of honoring those who ultimately faithfully served Him. Maybe? Nobody's saying anything?
Well, that's a very legitimate commentary, I think.
Imagine also having to do something with illustration as well.
What tribe are you associated with?
Well,
Benjamin or?
I don't think people today, unless they really do some digging, and I don't even know if you could be even certain, 100% certain. Now, of course, the Bible tells us that God is going to give us a
New name.
new name.
He's going to point you out.
Maybe He's going to say, you are part of
The Benjamin district.
tribe or whatever, kind of thing. I mean, again, those are things that everybody will be fine with, no matter how it plays out. Okay?
You got to remember, there's going to be a lot of people, in that.
I would think so.
So you got to have all them different gates to have enough for that many people to go in and out of.
Right, but there's nothing arbitrary in Scripture. I mean, is John just describing this wonderful place and giving us a little bit of detail here, or is there a greater significance for the information that he's revealing?
Well, it's possible that the fact that there were 12 angels at the gates, that was particularly for the illustration of that scenario. That isn't necessarily that the angels are stationed there, but in this situation, he told the angels to measure. And so apparently one of them gave John a report, but John sees all of these angels going out with their measuring stick to measure the city. So it may have been that they were there just primarily to give a measurement so that John could verify it or whatever. Not necessarily that they stay there or that they're, you know, rooted to that spot or anything. Just that they were there for the point of measuring it for him.
Well, you're gonna have a home in the city, and you're gonna have one in the country.
Maybe one on another planet, who knows?
You're gonna have one in, you're gonna plant
It's the
vineyards,
American
and eat
way.
the fruit of
Occupy.
them.
Yeah, occupy. Now, any structure, particularly of any size, has an adequate foundation, and this city's coming down with a foundation. Or is it coming down with a foundation, or is the foundation going to be prepared when Christ comes and actually splits the mountain, like it talks about in Zechariah 14 there? It says the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So you've got basically a representation of Old Testament, New Testament, where that's the way we divide the Bible historically. And you've got, so you end up with 24 representations there, which is a significant number in itself, because that's the number of elders around the throne and the throne seats around the altar, 24. And he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates, and its wall. So the city is going to be measured, the gates are going to be measured, and the wall is going to be measured. The city is laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth. And you measure the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs.
A long read.
And of course, 12,000 furlongs, what does that transpire into in terms of
That's like
miles?
375 miles on the side.
Well, that's 1,500 miles total. Okay? And of course, Kenny's dividing that by 4, but I'm going to make a suggestion that that number is divided by 5 instead of 4. Okay? And the reason I would say that is because if you have a city that's 4 square, right, that gives you 4 sides, but it says that the length and the breadth and the height are equal. Okay? So it's not only, so in other words, the height is as long as any one side of the building. You follow me there?
So it could be a cube or it could be a pyramid.
So you're describing either a cube or or a pyramid shape. Okay?
You know, it says
But you're dividing it by
50
5
cubits.
instead of 4. Pardon me?
The walls are supposed to be 50 cubits
What
high.
about a hexagon?
No,
No?
no. The sides and the height are equal.
It says
Oh,
four.
yeah.
The city lies 4 square too.
Okay, so you would think that that would be maybe an equilateral triangle, but it's not. It's an isosceles pyramid, not equilateral. And of course, when you have those particular measurements, you can get an idea, a potential idea of the dimension of the throne room itself, which would be the capstone.
Scott says the gate arrangement and the names of the tribes are similar to the arrangement around the tabernacle
Right.
in the 40 years of wandering in the desert in compass rows, north, south, east, and west.
Yeah, and Scott, that's exactly what I thought about. That's where my mind went when I looked at the way that these were set up. That 3 gates on the east, the north, the south, and the west. And of course, the children of Israel, that's the different tribes congregated around the tabernacle. Okay. So that's exactly what I thought about. All right, so the city's laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth, in other words, indicating a square. And it says here it's 1,500 miles, its length, breadth, and height are equal. So we're looking at an isosceles type of triangle or pyramid shape for the side if you run it that way. And then you measured its wall, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. Now that's an interesting expression right there.
Yeah, that angel, it ain't gonna tell how big he is.
That he measured its wall, 144 cubits. See, a cubit, there have been throughout history different measurements for cubits. Typically a cubit was supposed to be the measurement from your elbow to the tip of your finger. Okay, so what's that, about 25 inches
But
or
for
so?
a very tall man, it could be a little different.
Yeah, for somebody, yeah, if you're a tall person, it could be different. But now, look what this says here. This says here, he measured the wall, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. What do you think that really means? I mean, men and angels are different, right? They're different beings.
Well,
But what happens?
are we counting the early man?
I'm saying what
Before the
happens.
ark?
Well, we're talking about here. I mean, the saints have already gone to heaven. They've been there for the millennium. So this is after the millennium, right? What has happened during, you think, those 1,000 years of time that we're in the kingdom?
Look how
What's-
long the
what's
angels
happened?
has been living.
Well, yeah, the angels, the holy angels,
So they probably
have
huge.
they've been there as long as they were, since they were created. They've been, maintaining their stature and their being all that time. But for most humans, particularly after the flood, I mean, the oldest human's not even 1,000 years old according to Scripture. So, then after the flood, it degraded tremendously. But what happens during the millennium to the redeemed?
They live longer than 1,000 years?
We're talking about size here, aren't we? We're talking about the cubit. We're talking about what's the standard of the size of the cubit for.
Are you saying that we will physically be growing?
Yes, we'll grow
But
up.
that's only 1,000 of our Earth years. It's still going to be one of God's days.
Right,
We're going to be up there
Said
during one
we'll
of God's
grow
days.
up
Will
as
we be,
calves
which is
in a
1,000
stall.
years.
yeah, but will we be responding as though we were still on
I
Earth?
think you could do a little growing in 1,000 years.
Well, yeah, but if we're in heaven, and if in heaven it literally is a day, then wouldn't that mean that we just like spend a day in heaven?
We'll also
and
be
then-
given
No,
our new
we're thinking
bodies.
24 hours. No, we're talking, the millennium is a lot longer than 24 hours.
So that means that
What I'm saying, it's one of God's days. Therefore, however
Right,
long
and one of
that
his
is.
days takes 1,000 years. Remember, we're talking about rotation. The reason why we have a 24-hour period is because the earth turns on its axis. If God is at the center of the creation, out here, if you think of a wagon wheel hub and a wagon wheel, right? The hub is turning, right? But the further you get away from the hub, the greater the distance. What's the speed of the turn out here as the hub is turning? It's a lot faster. It's a lot faster, okay? So, one of God's days equals 1,000 of our years, okay? So, we're a distance away from the center of the universe. His day is turning very slowly, but for us, it's taking a lot longer, time-wise, to make that rotation all the way around for one of his days. It takes 1,000 of our years for that to occur, for one of his days to transpire.
So you're saying that you think our 24-hour day is not equal to his
No.
day. You're saying
Right,
that solarly it takes him 1,000 years.
1,000
to make a day.
of
1,000
what
of our
our
Earth
years for him to accomplish
For
one of his days.
one
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 day
turn
is
of the Earth.
1,000
And you remember, he's outside of
years,
time,
1
so
What does it
he's
matter?
outside of time. So for him, I think a day is only relative for us. And of course, it's mentioned in Scripture that it equals 1,000 of our years. But for him, he's outside of time. He's outside of dimension, right? So
Titus commented, it's still disheartening to realize that the redeemed are going to fit inside the city when you consider the population of the earth. How
Oh,
many
yeah.
people will be lost?
Yeah.
Well, it's a pretty gigantic city.
It's huge.
I mean, a city
Three,
that, you
well,
know,
it's 900 square miles at the base.
which is like from here to Florida.
Yeah,
Oh.
it's like from here to Florida.
So I mean, and,
Well, 300 miles would be like from here to Maryland,
yeah.
from here to Baltimore.
Oh, well, I was talking about the whole square, like the equal. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, from here to Baltimore. But then you're talking 900 square miles of space at the base. That is a huge amount. I mean, you can put everybody in the world today in Jacksonville, Florida, right? And that's nowhere near 900 square miles. All population today, all 7 plus 7.5 billion of us could fit in Jacksonville, Florida.
I think you each have like 3 square feet to yourself.
Plus, God could be engineering some really cool-looking high-rise buildings for people to
Well,
live in, right?
if you think of a pyramid, think of levels. You got, you know, not only do you have 900 square miles at the base, but let's say
Go up 10 or 12 feet and do another level.
not 10 or 12 feet because we're going to grow up. But even if you went up 100 feet, 100 feet.
You can tell he's already given this serious
I've already given
consideration.
it. Well, remember,
So we'll get there and we'll be like,
look,
Jesus, why is
remember,
this
if
so tall?
we're 300 miles down each side, we're also 300 miles high. The city is 300 miles high,
There's gonna be a lot
And God
of
doesn't waste
apartments, huh?
anything.
right? So you've got layers of floors. Man, can you imagine the elevator in that thing?
It took me 10 years to get to the top.
You know, the capstone. Well, because we have those dimensions, we can look at the capstone. If the capstone, of course, we know that it's all in proportion, right? So the capstone at the top level is 90 miles in circumference. Just the base of the capstone. The capstone is like this. The base of the capstone. And it's interesting too when you look at an isosceles triangle that are equal. All you know, if the height and the sides are equal. It's an isosceles triangle. The top angle 40 degrees. The bottom angles 70 degrees. Absolutely astounding. Okay, 70, the numerical number for Israel. So here you have a representation with the names of the tribes on the doors. You have a representation of ancient Israel and also ancient Jerusalem and New Jerusalem. In the angle of the city walls. At the top you have 40. What's the significance of number 40?
Probation.
That's God's complete number. It's a number of new beginning. It's a number of, you know, there were 40 days of the flood. It's the number of
days in the
change, a
wilderness.
new beginning, and
You're
accomplishment.
mentioning an isosceles triangle,
Yeah.
but there's also an equilateral triangle.
Yeah, an equilateral triangle would be all the sides are equal.
Right.
But if you look at the apex of the height, you're going straight up from the center. Okay? So you have an isosceles triangle where the sides are longer than
No,
the base.
equilateral triangle, they're all the same.
I know, dear. But if you have I should put the
I'm
board up.
sorry, geometry was not my best subject.
An equilateral triangle means that all the angles are equal. Okay, you have the base is certain. Okay, the base is 10 feet, the sides are 10 feet, but when you take the sides up 10 feet and meet, you don't have 10 feet of height, right?
Yeah.
You don't have 10 feet of vertical height. Okay, you got 10 feet of horizontal height. I mean, 10 feet of horizontal plane, right? But you don't. If you put 10 feet up, you don't have the same, because you're at an angle.
Yeah.
You lose some of that height. And this says the height and the length and the breadth are equal. So that turns it to an isosceles, which changes the angles to 40 and 70, which is astounding numbers for the New Jerusalem. So if the capstone then, you can look at the top layer of where the capstone is going to fit, and that's 30 miles. 30. Even if you have, I'm just assuming 10 layers of the city, right? So each layer will be 30 miles high, right? The capstone would be 30 miles at the base as it goes up, and it would have the same angles, 70 and 40. Every layer would have the same. The top layer would have the same angles as the bottom, very bottom.
Susan's been trying to visualize having that capstone placed.
But here's a capstone. Here's the throne room, 90 square miles. Now, why 90? See, I think that's significant, right? 90 square miles at the capstone. The reason that's significant is because that is, if you look at the stories of Elijah going up Mount Carmel, he was going against how many prophets of Baal?
450.
450. If you look at the story of Gideon, and when his soldiers were out there fighting, right? The ratio of Gideon's soldiers to the Midianites was what? 450 to 1. Okay? So when you start looking at these numbers, you soon find out, well, wait a minute, God's victory number is 450. Right? It's demonstrated in Scripture. Double it. And why would you double the 450 number, the victory number? Because he had victory in his human nature, he had victory in his divine nature to accomplish salvation. So you have the double victory number represented in the throne room in the New Jerusalem. It's astounding. Absolutely astounding. The stuff that's there, right? The stuff that we can even figure out. I mean, we can't figure it all out. We have a little bit of a glimpse of what the holy city is going to be like. But it's going to be emblematic of the plan of salvation and of victory and what God has done. It's just going to just totally cry out like that for all eternity. And it's going to be right here on the earth made new. Absolutely amazing. Anyway, we were talking about the 144 cubits. 144 is a very significant number as well. But this isn't this isn't our cubit today. This isn't 25-inch cubit, or the Royal Egyptian cubit was 20.62. You know, they were a little shorter people. 20.62 was the Royal Egyptian cubit, and that's the cubit we find in Noah's Ark. That's the cubit we find with the Ark of the Covenant, right? And other things based on that standard of measure. But this standard of measure is not of a fallen humanity. This standard of measure is of an angel, right? And we grow up during the millennium, right, to a height that is equal to an angel, right? When man was created in his mortal state, he was created a little bit lower than the angels. But when we grow up in heaven, we grow up to that stature of an angel. And what's our cubit going to be? What's our cubit going to be? Okay, that's the question, right? Our cubit is going to be probably 2.5 times at least greater than this.
Scott says 12 gates, tribes times 12 foundations. The apostles is 144.
Exactly.
According to the measure of a man, the wall was 144 cubits.
Yeah. So
It's going to be something to see.
So I think that when you actually do a calculation on the wall is going to end up being over 600 feet in height. Okay, now that would be a wall around the city. This is a wall separate from the actual walls of the pyramid itself. A pyramid structure has sloped walls, right? But they're going to be, according to what we just read, 300 miles in height. But if you look at the height of this wall here, it could be over 600 feet in height.
The top's going to be sticking in the cloud.
If you consider this being the potential for multiple layers within that pyramid structure, that explains how all of the righteous could be standing at the wall watching.
Yeah.
When that multitude of the satanic army rushes on them.
I
mean, you have,
I can't see.
Also, I was thinking, how do you deal with altitude sickness, like today?
Oh my.
No, I was just thinking about that because hyperbaric is how you treat altitude sickness.
Well, God had a hyperbaric world to start with.
and the pyramid shape is hyperbaric.
Right. I believe he's going to have a hyperbaric world.
That's why I was bringing it up. Because I was wondering about hyperbarics for being at such a high altitude.
Sure. See, there are lots of considerations here that we're just playing with that we have to look forward to. So we'll just have to wait and see all of the particulars. We're just reading what John is giving us
And John's trying to describe something in human language that he's never seen
The
before.
construction of its walls was here we got jasper again. The city was pure gold, like clear glass.
Ingrid says, what's the purpose of Revelation 21:9? Is it to reassure us? The fact that the Father is the architect tells me it will be of unfathomable splendor, which is all the reassurance I need.
Absolutely, yeah, unfathomable. Absolutely, no question. So again, John says the foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. That's where this idea of the bracelets came from. Putting together these quartz crystals, because all these foundation stones of the city are quartz, and of course what Rose has been studying into is that they emit a certain frequency, and so the city itself, like a hyperbaric chamber sim, is just prolific for promoting health and vitality. Something that we have really lost. We don't have that. There's no atmosphere around us that's promoting to any great degree the kind of atmosphere that this city and this environment is going to produce. It's going to energize. I mean, just to be there is going to energize you.
So it says none that in there will need or desire sleep.
Yeah, it's going to constantly
They're going to
energize you.
be
It's
constantly
like the
recharged.
battery will never run down. You know, it's an
We'll
energizer
need cell
buddy.
phones.
Be
What
an
that would
energizer
mean too
buddy.
is that what's happening as well is that cellular regeneration is taking place at such a rapid rate that, because I mean sleep is when we repair all that stuff.
Exactly.
So that means that now cellular regeneration is so
Taking
high
place
that
while
it avoids the
you
necessity of sleep.
sleep. Exactly. Yeah. And it
It
gives all
doesn't
the.
mean we won't sleep otherwise. It just means in the
It gives
city
all.
we
It,
need
it,
to.
it takes
At
the
least not
time
the
to
same.
actually give all of the. I know people have tried to really analyze and decipher these stones. You know, the jasper, the sapphire, the
Corn?
carcinity,
Chalcedony.
chalcedony, the emerald, the sarnix, the sardius, the crystallite, the beryl, the topaz, Christophray,
Rest of Praesus.
Phrasis.
Bless you.
Yes, please. Jamis,
Jacinth.
Jason,
And
amethyst.
There'd be
These
a
are-
apostle
I mean-
name on each one.
And of course, if you did a study on this, you'll find different people call these different things. So we're not 100% sure what all of those are going to be. But again, he repeats in verse 21. Well, he mentions the fact that each individual gates is a single pearl. That's a big clam, buddy. That is a big clam.
Or if it's of one
Well,
stone with a pearly finish.
Or it's just one giant solid pearl.
Yeah.
Either
I'm
way,
just
it
saying,
wouldn't be too hard for him.
you know, it wouldn't be too hard, but that would be one uncomfortable.
Streets, pure gold, like transparent glass.
is that pearl gonna be round?
Imagine the gates would have rounded edges on them, you know, so nobody would prick their wings. I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. And of course, if you have a capstone that's God's throne, that light is radiating down all sides as compared to a cube. So,
And you also have the city, the floors and the foundations being transparent or
Right.
translucent.
exactly.
So you would have the rainbow around the throne, and you would have a rainbow of light emitting from all sides of the city. Or you'd see that city from a long distance away.
It's astounding. The city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine, for in it the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light, and the nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light. And I mean, you're walking in energy. That's what Elijah was just talking about. You're being regenerated so quickly. Kings of the earth bring their glory and honor into it. Its gates shall not be shut at all by day. There shall be no night there in the city itself. And they shall bring the glory and the honor of the nations into it. But there shall be by no means enter anything that defiles or causes an abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life.
That's whenever he tells you there, and
So we're talking about a place that's so foreign to us, we can't even imagine what it would be like to be there. But God holds it out as an opportunity.
So one thing I was wondering, because I don't feel like the distance from Earth to space is that far. Will the kingdom actually extend into space?
Your mom and I have discussed that. You go 100 miles up and you're into outer space.
Yeah.
Okay. So, in fact, I think you can even, I can't remember the height that the guy, remember he went up in the balloon and he jumped off?
Yeah.
I think he was over 100,000 feet up there. Or was it just 80? I can't remember. What's it, 5,280? Maybe somebody could check that out, what he jumped from. But he was getting very close to outer space. I mean, for him to jump off of something, there had to be a bit of gravity to get him started to floating down, to float down to Earth.
Looks like 135,000 feet.
Is where he jumped from.
Yeah.
Okay.
He jumped from 128,000 feet, about 24 miles up.
That was the previous record.
That was the previous record. This is the highest guy who ever jumped up.
he can jump.
That's the
off
highest
I
of-
think the guy that jumped from the higher one actually didn't get counted in the record for some reason. There was something that didn't quite match whatever.
Anyway,
This is that
yeah,
guy.
you go 100 miles up and you're in outer space.
So 24 miles up, he's pretty much actually in
So
space.
the thing that we were talking about is how much of the city is actually in the earth. Does it go 100 miles down? You know, I mean, did those 12, are those 12 foundations necessary so that,
dig into the core.
I mean, are they they're going to take you to the core? You know, is the foundation of this city locked onto the core of the earth? I mean, you see, we don't know any of that.
It'd be warm.
Yeah, that base is gonna be so big, it won't have to.
Well,
go down
geothermal is the
water.
best way to go. It
Well, I mean,
maintains
just
the-
thinking of how heat interacts with those minerals as well would also have interesting implications.
But we're
for-
also going to have this city planted there when he makes the earth new. So it's got to be made of materials that can withstand the kind of heat that's going to melt everything away.
like a tooth rooted down to the core. I mean, we don't know, right? Or
Nothing but the whole tooth, yeah.
nothing but the whole tooth. And
The other record's considered space diving. It's no longer like skydiving. That's why I didn't find it.
No.
The other one was 60 miles up that he dived from. Dope.
yeah, if you went another 40 miles, you'd be floating in space. You wouldn't be. You if you stepped off of something, you'd just be floating. You wouldn't.
So
fall.
then you think the higher up we go to the kingdom, the less weight we have?
Well, listen. I can imagine God. If this is going to become the center of His creation, I can imagine Him enlarging the planet to the place where, of course, in the atmosphere, and it's there's a canopy around.
More
the
flying
whole thing.
space for us?
Canopy around the whole thing. So I can imagine God making it bigger and more splendid than even the original creation.
Yeah, well, if he dug into the earth a good bit, it looks like there's plenty of space going to the core.
Yeah, yeah. And what's down there? What's down there is lots of crystals and different things under the earth. I mean, but in fact, scientists today aren't even 100% sure about what's at the core.
Or that there's even a core.
They speculate that there's a solid core. Some people
Solid iron core?
Some people different from
We
that.
wouldn't have gravity apparently without a solid iron
Yeah,
core.
it all deals with the electromagnetic and gravity and static charge and all this kind of thing. But anyway, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, this world's fractured and this world is a wreck. God's going to make it all new again. He's going to make it a perfect place to be and live and exist and worship Him. So we might take some time, maybe a few minutes next week, to just read through chapter 22, because chapter 22 is just kind of a summary or a closing. I mean, you can't get any more spectacular being in the holy city and the world made new. So chapter 22 kind of ties everything up. And there's a couple things I want to mention about chapter 22 concerning the 6-to-1 ratio of the way the book's framed out and the context of what's established there. So we'll do that maybe for the first couple of minutes next week, and then we'll let Elijah lead us in a study as well. Sound good? All right, Ian, why don't you go ahead and close us out with prayer, unless somebody else wants to.
Okay. Father, we thank you so much for the Sabbath and this time that you've allowed us to come together and to study, and for the interesting insights that you've left for us with regards to the kingdom. Lord, it sounds exciting, it sounds beautiful, and I know we're all excited to see it at some point. And ask that you would keep us until that time and watch over us until we get to see it. And for the rest of the Sabbath day, bless our conversations and our time that we get to eat together and enjoy family time. And bless those who are able to watch online with us as well. This is my prayer in your Son's name. Amen.
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 Okay, guys, well, thanks for all your comments, and once again, thank you for writing in and your comments as well.
Susan
online.
said it's a restoration of what he originally intended, but all made new.
All made new. Much more, I think even more splendid than we can imagine. But anyway, thank you guys for chiming in as well, and we hope you have a great week. We'll see you here again next time. Homechurch.us, so right here in our little family room. Have a great week. Lord bless you.